She called his hand-built bridge community property, but when she sent cement trucks over it again, Trenton Vale showed her exactly where her authority ended, and it wasn't on his land. The bridge didn't just give out. It snapped like a gunshot. 1 second the cement truck was crawling across it, its tires creaking against the planks. The next, the back end dropped straight through, swallowed by a deep pool of clay and water. The sound echoed through the hollow like thunder. Mud splashed high enough to stain the driver's windshield. The man jumped out, boots sinking instantly into the sludge, shouting, "What the hell is this?" From his porch, Trenton Vale didn't move. He just watched, arms crossed, face calm, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his mouth. To anyone else, it looked like a freak accident, but Trenton knew better. He'd spent the past week waiting for this exact moment. The truck driver tried gunning the engine, but the back tires only spun deeper. The smell of burnt rubber filled the morning air. Birds scattered from the trees, and the noise drew neighbors out onto their lawns. One woman covered her mouth, another whispered, "That's Trenton's bridge, isn't it?" Judith Bramwell arrived within minutes. Her SUV screeched to a stop in front of Trenton's house. She stepped out with her clipboard, always with that clipboard, wearing her usual navy blazer even in the heat. Her voice cut through the air like glass. "Mr. Vale, what on earth did you do?" Trenton didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip from his coffee mug, then walked down the steps, the wood creaking under his boots. "Funny," he said. "I was about to ask you the same thing." Judith's face flushed red. "This is private property damage. You'll be paying for this." Trenton's tone stayed even. "Private property? You mean mine?" The truck driver, a younger man with a Tennessee accent thick as syrup, raised his hands. "Ma'am, I was told this was the shortcut to the new build on Willow Bend Road." He pointed toward the other side of the creek, where tire marks ran straight from Judith's direction. "I didn't know it was somebody's yard." Trenton kept his eyes on her. "And who told you that?" The driver hesitated. "The lady who runs the HOA." For a second, the only sound was the engine sputtering in the mud. Then Judith's voice dropped to a hiss. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Trenton looked past her at the bridge. The water glistened beneath the broken planks, sunlight bouncing off the clay. "No," he said. "Just tired." Behind them, neighbors had gathered closer. A half circle of quiet spectators pretending not to stare. Everyone knew about Judith. Everyone knew about her warnings, her letters, her friendly reminders about lawn heights and fence colors. Nobody dared challenge her, until now. Judith marched up to him, heels sinking slightly into the grass. "This is unacceptable. I'll have the county involved by noon. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." Trenton didn't blink. He pulled a small folder from under his arm, opened it, and held it out. Inside were maps, photos, and boundary records. The top page was marked with a county stamp. "You might want to look at this before you start making calls," he said. "That bridge? It's on my land. Every inch. The trucks you sent through it were trespassing. I've got pictures, dates, even video. I tried to warn you." Judith froze for a moment. She wasn't used to people coming prepared. Her eyes darted between the folder and the broken bridge. The driver stood awkwardly nearby, kicking mud off his boots. "You set this up," she muttered. "You wanted this to happen." Trenton's voice dropped lower. "No, you made it happen. I just built something to show you where my property ends." The driver scratched the back of his neck. "So am I good to call my boss, or?" Trenton gave a half smile. "You might want to tell him to bring a tow. That truck's not going anywhere for a while." The crowd let out a few muffled laughs. Judith spun on her heel, fuming, her face the color of her lipstick. She stomped back toward her SUV, muttering something about violations and reports. Trenton turned away, heading back toward his porch, but as he walked, he glanced once more at the wrecked bridge. A week ago, it had been whole. He could still hear the sound of it breaking, not from the truck but from the time before when Judith had ignored every warning. The morning the first boards cracked under another load. The day he realized he couldn't just sit back anymore. He looked down at his hands, rough, calloused, but steady. The same hands that had built that bridge from nothing. But to understand how it came to this, the trap, the broken bridge, the public humiliation, you've got to know how the fight began. Long before anyone knew his name in the neighborhood, Trenton Vale was just another man trying to build something of his own. He'd grown up in Memphis, the oldest of 3 brothers, raised by a father who believed that if something broke, you fixed it with your own hands. That lesson stuck. By the time Trenton was 40, he'd saved enough to buy a small piece of land outside Clarksville, Tennessee, where the noise of the city faded into the soft hum of cicadas and the rustle of old oak leaves. His house wasn't big, a one-story brick home with a narrow porch, an aging rocking chair, and a flagstone path that led straight to the creek. The property had been neglected when he bought it, fences leaning, grass gone wild, and the bridge across the creek barely standing. Most people would have called a contractor. Trenton just grabbed a toolbox. That bridge became his project, not just a piece of wood over water, but a statement. Every weekend he worked on it. He measured, sanded, stained, and reinforced each beam himself. He used cedar planks from a lumberyard in Dover, the kind that could stand against storms. His hands would be blistered by sunset, but there was satisfaction in that pain. He told a neighbor once, "When you build something with your hands, it knows who you are." The bridge stood about 30 feet long, sturdy enough for his ATV or the small trailer he used for yard work. It crossed a narrow creek that glimmered under the morning sun. On quiet days, he'd stand there with a fishing pole, boots in the mud, watching minnows dart under the shadow of his own handiwork. Life was slow, simple, and peaceful, until Judith Bramwell moved in. She arrived like a gust of wind that didn't know how to stop, a new homeowner, recently appointed head of the Riverside Meadow HOA. She wasted no time sending letters. Trash cans must not be visible from the street. All fences must match the HOA-approved color palette. Yard decorations require board approval. Trenton ignored the first few notes. He paid his dues on time, kept his yard clean, and didn't bother anyone. But Judith seemed to have him in her sights. She'd walk by his property twice a week, clipboard in hand, stopping just long enough to take photos. One day she called out, "Mr. Veal, you're aware that structures extending beyond the designated residential line must be reviewed by the board, right?" Trenton looked up from trimming his hedges. "If you mean the bridge, it's been here since before I bought the place. I just fixed it." Judith smiled in that way that didn't feel like smiling. "Well, any modifications are considered new constructions. I'll need documentation. Documentation for fixing something that's mine." She didn't answer directly. "It's protocol." Then she walked away. That was the first spark. Weeks later, when construction began on a few new homes across the creek, Trenton started noticing something strange. Tire tracks cut through his grass heading toward the bridge. He thought maybe a teenager had taken a shortcut, but then he saw it. A cement truck slowly crawling across the wooden planks he'd built with his own hands. He dropped his rake and shouted, "Hey! You can't go through there." The driver leaned out the window. Lady up the street said it was a service road. Trenton waved his arms. "It's not. That's private property." But the truck was already across. The planks groaned and his chest tightened as he watched one of the beams bend under the weight. The driver gave a lazy wave and drove off. Trenton could still see the deep ruts in his lawn hours later. He went straight to Judith's house that afternoon. Her driveway was lined with decorative stones, her flower beds perfectly symmetrical. When she opened the door, she looked almost pleased to see him. "Miss Bramwell," he began, "your construction guys are driving over my bridge. They're tearing up my yard." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, that. They're using the quickest route to the new development. It's temporary. It's not a route, it's my property. You don't have permission." Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Technically, Mr. Vale, that area could be considered common use. The creek runs along the shared boundary." "Not that part. I checked the maps." "Well," she said, "maybe you should have come to the HOA meeting last week. We discussed accessibility concerns for the new builds." Trenton felt his jaw tighten. "You can't vote to use my land." Judith gave a little shrug. "The board approved it." When she closed the door, Trenton stood there for a long moment, staring at the smooth white wood. He could feel heat rising in his chest, not just anger, something heavier. I sensed that she didn't see him at all. To her, he was just an obstacle on paper. Back at home, he walked down to the bridge again. One of the boards was already split clean across. He crouched down and ran his fingers over the crack. His reflection in the creek looked tired, older than he remembered. He sat there until sunset, listening to frogs croak under the brush, trying to figure out how far this would go. But the trucks didn't stop, and neither did she. And that's when the real trouble started. He felt anger, yes, but beneath that, a strange kind of sadness. It wasn't about wood or money. It was about being stepped on again. That night, sitting on his porch, he stared at the dark line of the creek, barely visible under the moonlight. He didn't know what he was going to do yet, but he knew one thing. This wasn't over. But he had no idea just how far he'd go, or how much one act of quiet defiance would shake the entire neighborhood. The next morning, the sound of hammers and engines echoed across the neighborhood again. Trenton stood by his kitchen window, staring at the mess by the creek. His bridge, half-sunk, splintered, torn apart, wasn't just broken. It was humiliated. The water that ran beneath it now carried chunks of wood and streaks of concrete dust. He'd spent years building peace on that land, and in a few reckless hours it had been destroyed by people who didn't even live there. He poured himself a cup of coffee, but the mug trembled slightly in his hand. Anger wasn't new to him, but this was different. It was controlled, slow, burning, and quiet. Later that day, Judith showed up again, clipboard in hand, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Two men in reflective vests followed behind. "Insurance assessors," she said. They didn't greet him. They didn't look at him. They just walked around the bridge, snapping photos and taking notes. Trenton stepped outside, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You bringing the press next?" he asked. Judith didn't smile. "This is standard procedure, Mr. Vale. We have to determine liability." "Liability?" he repeated. "You mean the people who trespassed and broke my bridge?" Her tone turned clipped. "We're reviewing whether that section is in fact private property. Until then, I'd appreciate your cooperation." He pointed toward the boundary markers, metal stakes in the ground he'd measured himself. "You can review all you want, but those markers don't move." Judith ignored him and turned to one of the inspectors. "Make sure you photograph the supports. I believe they weren't up to regulation." That was it. Trenton laughed, not out of amusement, but disbelief. "You're unbelievable." Judith straightened her blazer. "And you're emotional. It's never wise to take these things personally. Lady, you sent cement trucks over something I built with my own hands. You think that's not personal?" The inspectors glanced at each other, uncomfortable. Judith, of course, didn't flinch. "As I said, the board will handle it." When they finally left, Trenton stood in silence, his jaw locked tight. His neighbor, Cole Finney, appeared again at the fence line, cigarette in hand. "She's pushing you," Cole said. "Trying to get you to lose it." Trenton looked at him, eyes hard. "I'm not losing anything. I'm taking it back." Cole raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" Trenton didn't answer right away. "Meaning it's time she learns that some people can't be walked over." For the next few days, he avoided her entirely. But her presence was everywhere. Letters slipped into his mailbox, new rules emailed to the neighborhood. She'd even placed a temporary construction access sign near his property, as if to prove she still had the upper hand. He kept every letter, every photo, every small piece of proof. Late one night, he sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by papers. The old survey map was spread out in front of him. He ran his finger along the line, marking his boundary, and whispered, "You crossed it, Judith. You crossed it and thought no one would stop you." That was when the idea began to take shape, and not revenge, something smarter. Something that would make her face the consequences of her own arrogance without breaking a single law. The next morning, he started clearing the debris from the creek. He worked for hours, hauling splintered planks and broken nails into piles. Sweat ran down his temples, but he kept going. When the last of the wreckage was gone, he stood over the creek, hands on his hips, eyes fixed on the empty space. That night, Judith sent another notice, a formal warning for damaging communal property. He read it, folded it neatly, and placed it beside his coffee mug. He didn't even bother replying. Instead, he went to work. He spent his evenings at the Home Depot in Hopkinsville, buying fresh lumber, bolts, and tools. The cashier, a young man named Evan, noticed him returning several times over the week. "You building something big?" Evan asked. Trenton smiled slightly. "You could say that." He worked after sunset, the faint glow of his workshop light visible from the street. Cole would sometimes stop by, offering a beer or a hand. "You rebuilding the bridge already?" he asked one night. "Not exactly," Trenton replied. "I'm improving it." Cole gave him a curious look. "What kind of improvements?" "The kind that teaches respect." Cole let out a low whistle. "You're planning something, huh?" Trenton didn't deny it. He kept hammering, his rhythm steady, deliberate. When Judith passed by the next morning, she slowed her car to watch. "I hope you're following HOA standards this time," she called out. Trenton didn't look up. Don't worry. Everything's by the book. She didn't realize which book he meant. By the end of the week, the bridge stood again, stronger, cleaner, almost too perfect. Every plank was polished, every joint sealed. But beneath that fresh coat of stain lay something no one could see. A hidden mechanism, carefully designed to give way under heavy pressure. Just enough to trap without harming. He leaned on the railing that night, listening to the creak. The reflection of the moon shimmered across the new boards. Looks good, Cole said from behind him. Trenton nodded slowly. It's ready, but before the trap could spring, one more confrontation would set the whole neighborhood on edge, and make sure everyone was watching when the lesson began. The bridge looked brand new, almost elegant from the street. You'd never guess what was hiding underneath it. Every line was clean, every bolt perfectly placed. Judith drove by twice that week, slowing her SUV just enough to stare but not enough to stop. Trenton knew she couldn't resist inspecting his work. He wanted her curious and confident. He spent the evenings in his workshop surrounded by sawdust and the hum of a small radio. On the table beside him lay blueprints, sketched on notebook paper, covered in coffee stains and rough calculations. He'd designed a frame beneath the planks that could collapse in sections when a certain weight rolled over it. Harmless to a person, but a nightmare for something heavy like a cement truck. The center would drop about 3 feet into a shallow pit, lined with wet clay and water. It wasn't deep enough to cause danger, just enough to embarrass whoever tried crossing again. He called it his quiet justice. Cole stopped by one evening, resting his arm on the doorframe. You sure about this, man? She's got connections, and you know how these HOA folks are. They love paperwork more than people. Trenton didn't stop hammering. She won't have paperwork for this. I've got permits, survey maps, everything legit. I even made sure it drains properly. There's not a thing illegal about what I'm doing. Cole grinned. So it's legal revenge? Trenton smirked. Call it creative boundary enforcement. They both laughed. But underneath the humor was something sharper. That quiet satisfaction of taking back control from someone who thought they owned you. For days, the bridge sat untouched. Judith didn't call, didn't write, didn't send another email. It was strange, too quiet. Trenton had a feeling she was waiting, letting him believe the feud had cooled down. But she wasn't the kind of woman to back off easily. He was right. The following Friday, he spotted 2 unfamiliar pickup trucks at the far end of the street. Big, loud, and covered in dried cement. He felt that familiar pulse in his chest, the same mix of anger and anticipation that had been building for weeks. He stepped off his porch and walked down to the mailbox, pretending to check his mail as one of the drivers approached. Hey, man, the driver said, flipping up his sunglasses. We're supposed to pour for the property over the creek. HOA lady said we could use this way again, said it was all fixed. Trenton looked at him for a long moment. Yeah, he said slowly. It's fixed. The driver nodded, hopped back in the truck, and started down the path. The gravel crackled beneath the tires, and Trenton turned, walking calmly toward his porch. Cole was already leaning on the fence, eyes wide. She's doing it again, Cole called out. Trenton didn't answer. He just sat on the porch steps, coffee mug in hand, watching. The first truck reached the bridge and rolled forward. The wood creaked slightly, but everything held. The second truck followed close behind, heavy with cement. Then came that sound, faint at first, then louder, a soft groan that turned into a deep crack. The driver shouted something, but it was too late. The center planks gave way with a loud snap, and the back tires sank straight into the clay pit below. The front half of the truck stayed on. The bridge tilted upward like a stranded boat. Mud splashed high onto the driver's door. The driver threw open the door and jumped down, boots sliding in the muck. He looked up at the bridge, then back at Trenton, who was still sitting quietly on his porch. You did this, the driver yelled. Trenton shrugged. It's my bridge. I built it. If it can't hold your truck, maybe you shouldn't be driving on it. The second driver pulled up short, refusing to move any closer. Man, I told you this was somebody's property, he said to his partner. That's when Judith's SUV came roaring around the bend, just like he'd expected. She stepped out, heels clicking, face tight with fury. What happened here? She demanded. The trapped driver gestured wildly toward the pit. Your shortcut just swallowed my truck. Judith's head whipped toward Trenton. You're going to pay for this, Mr. Vale. This is sabotage. He stood up slowly, walked down the steps, and approached her. Sabotage? That's a strong word. I rebuilt my bridge. It's private property. What happens when people trespass isn't my problem. She glared at him. You think this is funny? I think it's justice, he said quietly. You broke it once. I rebuilt it better. You told your people it was yours. Now everyone gets to see who's been lying. The truck driver had already called his supervisor. Another neighbor, Patricia North, came out from her yard with her phone recording everything. Y'all might want to stop yelling, she said. This looks like a whole lawsuit waiting to happen. Judith snapped, Turn that off, Patricia. Patricia didn't. She just said, Freedom of information, honey. Trenton couldn't help but smile. The neighborhood was finally watching. The power Judith had carried like a crown was slipping inch by inch in front of everyone's eyes. Judith pointed a shaking finger at him. You're finished, Mr. Vale. I'll make sure of it. Trenton met her gaze, calm as ever. You've already done enough damage. The rest is on record. She hesitated. What record? He lifted a small GoPro camera from the porch railing. This one. Her face drained of color. But the moment of confrontation was only the beginning. Because when the authorities arrived, the real shock came not from the trap, but from what they discovered beneath it. The sirens came fast. Within 15 minutes, 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled up the gravel road, lights flashing. Word had spread faster than wildfire. Half the neighborhood was out by now, phones raised, recording every second. It wasn't every day something like this happened in Riverside Meadow. Deputy Rick Hanley stepped out first, tall and broad, his hand resting on his belt. He took one look at the scene. A cement truck nose up on a half-collapsed bridge, mud everywhere, Judith Bramwell standing rigid with her arms crossed, and let out a slow sigh. All right, he said. Who's in charge here? Judith immediately pointed at Trenton. He is. He rigged the bridge to collapse under my construction team's vehicle. This is criminal sabotage. Trenton didn't say a word at first. He let the deputy look around. The smell of wet cement hung thick in the air, and the trapped truck hissed faintly from the pressure lines. After a pause, Trenton spoke evenly. Officer, the bridge is on my property. I have every right to repair, rebuild, or modify it as I see fit. And, he said, handing over a folder, I've got full documentation of that fact, including county permits and dated photos. Deputy Hanley opened the folder. Inside were the stamped property records, survey maps, and even time-stamped photos of the rebuilt bridge. Trenton had been smart enough to take them at every stage of construction. Judith's voice rose an octave. You can't seriously be taking his side. He set a trap. The deputy turned toward her. Ma'am, did you have permission to use this bridge? Her jaw tightened. The HOA approved the route. HOA isn't a government authority, Hanley replied calmly. If this bridge is on Mr. Vale's property, that's private land. You can't direct trucks through it without his consent. Judith's cheeks flushed. That's not how it works. The HOA rules don't override property law, Hanley interrupted. The crowd murmured. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to smile. Meanwhile, the driver, still stuck in the clay pit, climbed onto the truck's hood. Hey, can somebody just call a tow before this thing sinks any deeper? Trenton kept his expression calm, though inside he could feel a weight lifting. Weeks of frustration, humiliation, and silence unraveling right in front of her. But not by his hand, acted by her own arrogance. Judith tried to regain control. Officer, this man deliberately created a hazard. He endangered public safety. Trenton gestured toward the bridge. Public safety? There's nothing public about this, ma'am. You trespassed. Your trucks damaged private property, twice. I simply rebuilt what was mine. If someone drove where they weren't supposed to, that's on them. Hanley scratched his chin. I'm not seeing any violation here. If anything, we've got unauthorized access to private land. The color drained from Judith's face. You can't be serious. The deputy radioed for the tow crew. I'd suggest you all settle this civilly. But if it were me, he added, turning to Trenton, I'd press for compensation. Looks like you've got all the proof you need. Judith spun toward the small crowd that had gathered. You all saw what happened. He set this up. Patricia North spoke up from across the street, camera still rolling. Yeah, we saw. We also saw your trucks crossing his yard all week. Maybe the HOA should mind its own business for once. That comment sparked laughter. Quiet at first, then louder. Judith turned, glaring at her neighbors one by one. The power she once held, the intimidation, the authority, was slipping away like mud between her fingers. Trenton stepped forward, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You could have just asked, Judith. You could have come to me and we would have worked something out, but you chose to treat me like a problem instead of a person." For the first time, she didn't have a quick reply. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The tow truck arrived soon after, chain clanking, engine rumbling. It took nearly an hour to pull the cement truck free. The bridge held steady through the whole process, though everyone could see the damage. Deep tire ruts, splintered planks, chunks of dried cement embedded in the wood. Before leaving, Deputy Hanley walked back over to Trenton. "You did everything right here. If she keeps bothering you, file a restraining complaint or get a lawyer involved. Folks like her don't quit until they're forced to." Trenton nodded. "Thanks, officer. I've got it from here." When the cruisers finally left, the crowd began to thin. A few neighbors walked over to him, offering quiet pats on the back or a simple nod of respect. Cole approached last, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Well," Cole said, "I'd say that's a solid win." Trenton let out a breath, almost a laugh. "More like a lesson," Cole smirked. "You think she learned it?" "Not yet," Trenton said, "but she will." He looked toward Judith's SUV as it sped off, tires squealing down the road. For all her anger and bluster, she'd seen what happened when someone pushed too far. The bridge might have been the battlefield, but what broke that day wasn't wood. It was control. That night, Trenton stood by the creek again, flashlight in hand. The moonlight shimmered over the surface, the water calm and still. He took a deep breath, the air thick with damp earth and quiet triumph. The neighborhood had watched him stand his ground without raising his voice or breaking a rule. It wasn't revenge that satisfied him. It was justice done cleanly, undeniably, and in plain sight. But even after the trucks were gone and the road was silent again, Judith wasn't finished. And Trenton was about to learn that humiliation doesn't always stop people. Sometimes it makes them dangerous. 2 days passed. The mud had settled around the creek, but the tension hadn't. Judith Bramwell had gone silent. No visits, no letters, no HOA notices tucked under doors. For the first time in months, the neighborhood was calm. Too calm, Trenton didn't trust it. People like Judith didn't disappear. They plotted. On Wednesday evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, he was sitting on his porch when he heard the sharp crunch of tires on gravel. Her SUV appeared again, stopping right at the edge of his property. She didn't get out right away. The engine idled for a long moment, humming like a warning. Finally, the door opened. Judith stepped out wearing her usual blazer, but her expression was different this time. Tighter, sharper, her eyes cold. She walked toward the porch, her heels digging into the dirt, clipboard in hand as always. "Mr. Vale," she said, her tone restrained but sharp. "We need to have a serious conversation." Trenton didn't move. "About what, my bridge? Your trucks?" Her eyes flicked toward the creek. "About the fact that you humiliated me in front of the entire neighborhood." He gave a short laugh. "You did that to yourself, Judith." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I had authority. I was acting under community guidelines. And you—" She pointed at him, her hand trembling slightly. "You set me up to fail. You made me look like a fool." He leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees. "You didn't need my help for that. You just needed a mirror." For a second, she didn't respond. The air between them tightened, the cicadas buzzing louder in the trees. Then she spoke again, quieter this time. "You think this is over, don't you?" "I think it should be." She shook her head slowly. "You don't understand how this works. People like you think you can just do whatever you want because you own a patch of dirt. But neighborhoods need structure, order. Someone has to keep things in line." Trenton stood now, his shadow stretching across the porch. "That order you're talking about, it's just control. You use rules like weapons. I use them to protect standards," she fired back. "Standards don't mean much when you forget about people." Her voice cracked for a second, revealing something raw beneath the polished tone. "You embarrassed me, Trenton, in front of everyone. Do you know what that does to someone like me?" He paused. "Maybe it makes them realize they're not untouchable." She took a step closer, close enough for him to see the faint tremor in her jaw. "I could ruin you, you know. The HOA has power, connections. You think those neighbors clapping for you will still cheer when your property fees triple? When your name's dragged through paperwork?" Trenton's voice stayed even. If that's what you need to feel better, go ahead. But I'm not moving an inch. Not from this porch, not from this bridge, not from the truth. Judith stared at him, breathing heavily, her hands clenched around her clipboard. You think you won, but you don't win against people like me. You just delay the inevitable. He tilted his head slightly. You ever get tired of fighting, Judith? Of trying to control every piece of dirt that isn't yours? She blinked for just a second. Her face softened, not much, but enough for him to see the exhaustion behind her defiance. It was gone just as quickly. You'll regret this, she said finally. I promise you that. Then she turned and walked away, her steps quick, sharp, deliberate. The SUV door slammed, gravel spraying behind her tires as she sped off. Trenton stood there for a long time, watching her disappear down the road. The sky was turning purple now, streaked with the last light of day. Cole walked over from next door, carrying 2 beers. She came back, huh? He said, handing one over. Yeah, Trenton muttered. Didn't take long. Cole popped the cap off his bottle. She threatened you again? Trenton gave a half smile. Pretty much. Cole took a sip. Man, you'd think after that mess she'd learn. Trenton looked toward the bridge, the wood glinting under the fading sun. Some people can't handle being wrong. To them, losing control feels like being disrespected. Cole nodded. You gonna do anything about it? No, Trenton said, voice steady. Not yet. The more she talks, the deeper she digs her own hole. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that carries weight. The sound of frogs echoed faintly from the creek. Cole finished his beer and stood. Well, if she comes back with another truck, I'm bringing popcorn. Trenton chuckled quietly. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. As night fell, he walked back to the bridge one more time. The water below rippled softly, reflecting the stars. He leaned against the railing, feeling the rough wood beneath his hands. He wasn't proud of the trap, but he didn't regret it either. It wasn't revenge, it was a boundary. One that should have been respected from the start. He turned back toward his house, lights glowing warm through the windows. The storm might have passed for now, but something told him Judith wouldn't stay silent for long. The next time she came after him, she wouldn't use trucks or threats. She'd use something much harder to fight. Reputation. Continued. This is the first half of your text, fully punctuated and formatted in paragraph form exactly as you requested. Would you like me to continue and finish the rest of the story? The HOA meeting, Judith's downfall and the ending, in the same style. Thanks for watching this video, and also subscribe my Chanel Story Haven.